My name is Isabella Reed, and at 35 years old, I've built a billion-dollar tech empire that nobody in my family knows about. For 15 years, I've let them believe I'm barely surviving as a graphic designer in a tiny apartment. The pitying looks, the condescending advice, the "when are you getting a real job" questions, I've endured it all. Then Forbes published their annual billionaires list with my face on it, 1 week before our big family reunion. I never planned to reveal my success this way, but sometimes life makes choices for you. Stick around to witness how my family reacted when they discovered their struggling artist daughter is actually worth more than all of them combined. Before I dive in, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever kept a massive secret from your family. Growing up in suburban Connecticut, our family had a very clear hierarchy. My father, Richard, was the unquestioned authority, a successful investment banker who measured everyone's worth by their financial achievements and prestigious degrees. My mother, Caroline, was the perfect corporate wife who managed our family's social calendar and image with precision. My older brother Michael followed perfectly in Dad's footsteps, attending Wharton and joining a prestigious firm. My younger sister Olivia became a surgeon, fulfilling the other acceptable career path in our family's eyes. Then there was me, the middle child, always drawing, coding, creating things nobody in my family understood or valued. I showed early artistic talent, but also had a knack for technology that went unnoticed. While my siblings received lavish praise for their report cards and extracurriculars, my sketchbooks and early website designs were dismissed as cute hobbies that would never pay the bills. "Isabella, when are you going to get serious about your future?" became the constant refrain throughout my teenage years. My father would lecture me at dinner about practical career choices, while my mother would leave college brochures for business schools on my bed. Even Michael and Olivia joined in, suggesting I was wasting my potential on artsy stuff. The breaking point came during my sophomore year of college. I'd been accepted to both the business program my father demanded and the digital arts program I loved. When I chose the latter, my father's disappointment was palpable. "Don't come crying to us when you're struggling to make rent," he said. That night, I made a decision that would shape the next 15 years of my life. I would succeed on my own terms, without their support and without their knowledge. I worked multiple jobs to put myself through college, refusing any financial help from my parents. Holidays became tense affairs where I deflected questions about my career and finances. I learned to present a carefully crafted image, the struggling but passionate artist who is still figuring things out. It wasn't entirely false. I was working endless hours, just not in the way they assumed. What my family never saw were the nights I spent coding in my dorm room, developing the algorithm that would eventually become the foundation of VisualSphere, my company. They didn't see me winning a small but prestigious tech competition that connected me with my first investors. They didn't know about the tiny startup I launched with 3 other students, working out of a garage apartment with secondhand computers. After graduation, our communication became even more limited. I moved across the country to California, which made it easier to maintain the illusion. Phone calls were brief and superficial. During obligatory holiday visits, I wore thrift store clothes and complained vaguely about client deadlines and the competitive industry. I became an expert at changing the subject whenever career discussions arose. Meanwhile, my siblings' successes were celebrated loudly and frequently. Michael's promotions, Olivia's medical accomplishments, their beautiful homes and growing families, all were proudly displayed on my parents' mantle and social media pages. My mother's Christmas letters mentioned them extensively, while I was referenced in a single sentence: "Isabella continues her artistic pursuits in California." This pattern continued for years. I missed weddings claiming I couldn't afford the flights. I sent modest gifts while secretly donating to charities in my family members' names. I lived in a luxury apartment building but kept a small, sparsely furnished studio for the rare occasions when family might visit. I drove a sensible used car when in their presence, keeping my collection of vintage and luxury vehicles safely hidden in a private garage. The irony was that as VisualSphere grew from startup to industry leader, As our revolutionary visual recognition software began transforming multiple industries, as my personal wealth crossed into 9 figures and then 10, the divide between my real life and my family persona only widened. The more successful I became, the more impossible it seemed to bridge that gap. There were moments I almost told them. When we hit our first million users. When we went public. When I made my first billion. But each time, I remembered my father's dismissive tone, my mother's pitying glances, my siblings' condescending advice. The wound of being the family disappointment had scarred over, but it hadn't healed. And over time, maintaining the illusion became almost a challenge. How long could I, the supposedly least successful Reed, secretly outperform them all? I told myself it wasn't about revenge or proving them wrong. It was about authenticity, about succeeding on my own terms. But deep down, I knew the day would come when the truth would emerge. I just never expected it would be Forbes magazine that would finally tear down the elaborate facade I'd spent 15 years constructing. The morning Forbes released their annual billionaires list, I was in Tokyo closing an acquisition deal. My phone started buzzing incessantly during a meeting, which was unusual since my executive team knew not to interrupt me during negotiations. When I finally checked during a break, I had 17 missed calls and dozens of message notifications. My chief of staff, Vanessa, had sent a simple text. Forbes list is out. You're number 267. They used your college graduation photo. I'm so sorry. My stomach dropped. For years, I'd managed to keep a low profile despite visual sphere success. I rarely gave interviews, never attended industry parties, and used a holding company structure that obscured my majority ownership. Our PR team had been masterful at keeping my personal details private, focusing all media attention on our products rather than their creator. But the Forbes researchers had been persistent this year. After repeatedly declining their interview requests, they had pieced together my ownership stakes from public filings. And somehow, they'd gotten hold of that old graduation photo, the last picture taken before I'd walked away from my family's expectations. I excused myself from the meeting and called Vanessa. How bad is it? I asked. Full profile. They're calling you the invisible billionaire. They mention your family, not by name, but they noted you're from a Connecticut banking family and referenced your unconventional path, compared to your siblings in finance and medicine. I sat down heavily. Anyone from my family call yet? Not directly, Vanessa said carefully. But your company email has received messages from several Reeds in the past hour. Your assistant is fielding them. I thanked her and ended the call, then sat staring out at the Tokyo skyline. 15 years of careful separation between my personal and professional lives, undone by a single magazine article. The annual Reed family reunion was scheduled for next weekend, a gathering I usually avoided with work excuses, but had reluctantly agreed to attend this year after missing my niece's graduation. Now I faced an impossible choice: cancel at the last minute and appear to be hiding, or show up and face the inevitable confrontation. Neither option felt right. Back in my hotel room, I finally gathered the courage to look at the article. The Forbes profile was surprisingly detailed, outlining how I'd built Visual Sphere from a college project into a tech giant now worth over $14 billion. They'd calculated my personal net worth at $7.3 billion, placing me among the youngest self-made female billionaires in the world. The article praised my technical innovations and business acumen, calling me refreshingly authentic in an industry often dominated by ego and flash. They'd spoken to former classmates, early investors, and industry analysts who all expressed admiration for both my vision and my desire for privacy. The final paragraph was what concerned me most. Unlike many in the billionaire ranks, Reed has maintained a low profile and seemingly modest lifestyle, eschewing the typical trappings of extreme wealth. Sources close to Reed suggest this might stem from her upbringing in a traditional East Coast family, where her artistic and entrepreneurial interests were overshadowed by more conventional career paths pursued by her siblings. The intensely private CEO declined multiple interview requests, but her remarkable journey from overlooked middle child to technology visionary speaks volumes about resilience and the changing nature of success in America. I winced at the armchair psychology, though it wasn't entirely wrong. My phone buzzed again, a text from my mother. Isabella, please call immediately. We need to discuss this situation. Another from my brother Michael. Seriously, Izzy? A billionaire? WTF? From my sister Olivia. Why would you keep this from us? I thought we were family. The most surprising was from my father, typically a man of few words. I don't understand. I turned my phone off and ordered room service, knowing I needed time to process before responding. The carefully constructed wall between my two lives had crumbled, and I had no prepared script for this scenario. That night, I barely slept. I drafted and deleted dozens of messages to my family. Should I apologize for the deception? Defend my choices? Pretend it was all a misunderstanding? By morning, I'd made my decision. I would attend the family reunion as planned, face whatever came, and finally merge my fractured identities into one authentic self. I called my assistant and asked her to book my usual commercial flight to Connecticut, then stopped myself. Actually, Diane, let's use the company jet this time. And have the driver bring the Aston Martin, not the Honda. If I was going to finally reveal my true self to my family, there was no point in half measures. The contrast between my professional reality and the persona I presented to my family couldn't have been more stark. At Visual Sphere's headquarters in San Francisco, I led a team of over 2,000 brilliant, creative people working on the cutting edge of visual recognition technology. Our software had revolutionized everything from medical diagnostics to autonomous vehicles, and was now being integrated into space exploration systems. The Isabella Reed who walked through those glass doors each morning was confident, respected, and unapologetically herself. I wore what I wanted, usually simple but impeccably tailored clothes that reflected my minimalist aesthetic. I spoke directly and with authority. I made billion-dollar decisions without seeking anyone's approval. My opinions weren't just valued, they shaped an entire industry. My executive floor featured a showcase of my artwork. Large-scale digital pieces that merged technology with traditional techniques, the very impractical hobby my family had dismissed. Several pieces had sold at charity auctions for six figures. Not that I'd ever mentioned this during family gatherings where my artistic pursuits were still treated as a cute diversion. On the day after the Forbes article was published, I returned from Tokyo to an office filled with champagne and congratulations. My team had always respected my privacy, but they were genuinely happy to see my achievements recognized publicly. Speech, called out Marcus, my first employee and now Chief Technology Officer, as I walked into our weekly all-hands meeting. I rarely discussed personal matters at work, but this moment called for transparency. As some of you know, I've maintained a certain separation between my professional success and my personal life, particularly with my family, I told the gathered employees. That wall came down yesterday, and I'm still processing what that means. But I want to thank all of you for helping build something that speaks for itself, regardless of who gets the credit. Later, in my private office with its sweeping view of the bay, I met with my executive team to discuss the immediate PR implications. Our company had always maintained a low profile by Silicon Valley standards, focusing on our technology rather than personality-driven marketing. This sudden spotlight threatened to change that. The media requests are pouring in, said Natalie, our head of communications. Everyone from Wall Street Journal to Ellen wants an exclusive. Decline them all for now, I replied. Stick to our standard statement about focusing on innovation rather than publicity. What about the family angle? Asked Natalie carefully. Several outlets are specifically asking about the rags to riches narrative and your family's reaction. I shook my head firmly. Absolutely no comment on family matters. That's completely off limits. After the meeting, I sat alone with Marcus, who'd been with me since those early days coding in a garage apartment. As both my CTO and closest friend, he was one of the few people who knew the full story of my family dynamics. So, you're really going to the reunion? He asked, leaning against my desk. After the article? I nodded. 15 years of hiding is enough. It's time to reconcile these two versions of myself. Want me to come as backup? Marcus offered. I could pose as your secretary, or something. That made me laugh. The 6'4" tattooed guy with a PhD from MIT as my secretary? That wouldn't raise any questions at all. His expression turned serious. They don't deserve you, Izzy. Never have. I hope you remember that when they start pretending they always believed in you. I appreciated his protectiveness, but knew this was something I had to face alone. I'll be fine. The hardest part will be explaining why I felt I needed to hide my success in the first place. Just tell them the truth, Marcus suggested. You never hid your success. You just never corrected their assumptions. It was technically true. I never actually lied about Visual Sphere or my role in it. I'd simply allowed my family to believe what they wanted to believe, that my move to California had been a naive pursuit of artistic dreams rather than the founding of what would become a tech empire. The following day, I worked from home, preparing for both the Tokyo acquisition announcement and the impending family confrontation. My West Coast modern home, an architectural masterpiece built into a hillside with floor-to-ceiling windows and an infinity pool overlooking the ocean, was about as far from the struggling artist apartment my family imagined as possible. As I reviewed documents in my home office, surrounded by original artwork from my favorite contemporary artists, I reflected on the elaborate deception I'd maintained. The modest gifts I sent for birthdays and holidays. The excuses about tight budgets when declining destination weddings. The careful curation of my social media to show simple pleasures rather than luxury. Now, preparing to board my private jet to Connecticut, I packed a suitcase that reflected my actual life rather than the costume I usually wore for family gatherings. No more thrift store finds and costume jewelry. I included the watch I'd bought myself when we went public, a subtle Patek Philippe that cost more than what my family thought I earned in a year. Before leaving, I had one more video call with my leadership team to finalize the Tokyo announcement. As we discussed integration strategies and personnel transitions, I found myself thinking how ironic it was that I could navigate complex corporate mergers with confidence, yet the prospect of a weekend with my family filled me with dread. Isabella? Your thoughts on the timeline? Vanessa prompted, pulling me back to the discussion. Sorry, I was thinking about another merger, I said, earning knowing looks from my team. Let's accelerate by 2 weeks. The sooner we integrate their team, the faster we'll see results. After the call, I stood on my terrace overlooking the Pacific. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. For 15 years, I'd built a life and a company on my own terms. I'd proven my worth to myself, if to no one else. Whatever happened at the reunion, I would finally be walking in as my complete, authentic self. It was terrifying and liberating all at once. My phone buzzed with a text from the pilot. Jet is ready whenever you are, MS. Reed. It was time to stop hiding. The private jet touched down at Bradley International Airport on Friday afternoon. I'd chosen to arrive a day before the main reunion events, hoping for some one-on-one conversations before facing the entire extended family. The familiar Connecticut landscape rolled by as my driver navigated toward my parents' home in Greenwich, the same house where I'd grown up, though it had been extensively renovated over the years. I'd booked a suite at the nearby Delamar Hotel rather than staying at the family home as expected. After the Forbes revelation, I needed neutral territory and the option of retreat. The decision would undoubtedly be interpreted as another slight by my mother, who prided herself on hosting her children, but it was a boundary I needed to establish. After checking into the hotel and changing into a simple but elegant outfit, dark jeans, a cashmere sweater, and understated jewelry that wouldn't immediately signal its 5-figure price tag, I took a deep breath and called for the car. I decided to drive myself in the Aston Martin, another small act of authenticity that felt both trivial and profound. The gates of my parents' estate looked exactly as I remembered, though the security system had been upgraded. I punched in the code my mother had texted earlier that week, half expecting it not to work, as if my deception had somehow invalidated my right to enter. The long driveway curved through manicured grounds, revealing the colonial-style mansion that had never quite felt like home to me. As I pulled up to the front, I saw 3 cars already parked, my parents' Mercedes, Michael's Range Rover, and what I assumed was Olivia's Tesla. They were waiting for me. All of them. Before I could even turn off the engine, the front door opened. My mother stood there, elegantly dressed as always, her expression a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. Behind her, my father's tall frame appeared, followed by my siblings. I stepped out of the car, acutely aware of their eyes taking in the vehicle, a far cry from a used Honda I'd previously driven to family gatherings. No one moved to greet me, with the usual hugs. Instead, they stared as though I were a stranger who had invaded their home. My mother broke the silence first. "Isabella, you're early. We expected you tomorrow with everyone else." Her tone was controlled, polite, the voice she used with acquaintances rather than family. "I thought it might be good for us to talk before the whole family arrives," I replied, climbing the familiar steps. "Hello, Mom, Dad, Michael, Olivia." My father simply nodded, his expression unreadable. Michael's face showed a mixture of shock and something that looked uncomfortably like calculation. Only Olivia stepped forward to offer a stiff hug. "Nice car," she said pointedly as she pulled away. I guess Forbes wasn't exaggerating. The tension was thick as we moved into the formal living room, where drinks had already been poured. I declined the offered wine, asking for water instead. I needed a clear head for what was coming. "So," my father finally spoke, his authoritative voice filling the room. $7 billion. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. The Forbes estimate is actually conservative. With private holdings and recent valuations, it's closer to 9. My mother gasped softly. Michael let out a low whistle. My father's expression didn't change. "And you didn't think this was something your family should know?" he continued. I took a careful sip of water. "I thought you knew I was successful. I never hid the name of my company or my role in it." "Successful." My mother's voice rose slightly. "Isabella, we thought you were a graphic designer barely making ends meet. You've let us worry about you for years. Your father even set aside a trust fund in case you needed financial help." The irony was almost laughable. The idea that I, who could buy and sell their entire estate with petty cash, had a secret trust fund waiting. "I never asked for help," I said quietly. "And I never needed it." "That's not the point," Olivia interjected. "The point is you deliberately misled us. Do you know how many times I've defended you to colleagues who asked what my sister does?" "Oh, she's an artist in California," I'd say, making it sound as impressive as possible. "And all this time you were what?" "Tech royalty." Michael, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "What I don't understand is why. Was it some kind of test? Were you laughing at us all these years, thinking we weren't good enough to know the real you?" His question hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. Had there been an element of that in my deception? A desire to prove something without giving them the satisfaction of knowing I'd succeeded? "It wasn't like that," I said, though part of me wondered if it had been, at least initially. "At first, it was simpler to let you believe what you already thought of me. You had such fixed ideas about what success looked like." "So this is our fault?" my father asked, his voice dangerous and quiet. I met his gaze directly. "No. The choice was mine." "But it didn't happen in a vacuum." I turned to look at each of them. "Do you remember my college graduation? When I told you I was moving to California to pursue digital arts?" My mother waved dismissively. "Of course we remember. We were concerned about your future, as any parents would be. You told me I was making a mistake I'd regret for the rest of my life," I reminded my father. "You said my degree was worthless." "I was trying to protect you from disappointment," he defended. "And instead, you became the source of it," I replied, surprising myself with the directness. Every accomplishment I shared was minimized. Every choice I made was questioned. At some point, it became easier to stop sharing altogether. The room fell silent as my words hung in the air. Through the window, I could see the garden where I'd spent countless hours sketching as a teenager, often hiding from family functions where I felt out of place. "So, all those times you couldn't afford to fly home for Christmas?" my mother asked quietly. "I was usually in Japan or Europe closing deals." And the tiny apartment you complained about? A cover. I've owned my house on the Pacific for 8 years. The boyfriend who broke up with you last year? Olivia asked. I smiled sadly. Julian was real. He ended things when he realized he'd always come second to my company. That part was true. My father stood up and walked to the window, his back to us. For a man who valued financial success above all else, learning his supposedly least successful child had surpassed even his considerable wealth must have been disorienting. Who else knows? He asked, still facing away. About your real life? Everyone else, I admitted. My team, my friends in California. It was only with family that I maintained the illusion. I feel like I don't know you at all, my mother said, tears forming in her eyes. The statement hurt, but it wasn't inaccurate. They knew the shadow version of me I'd allowed them to see, a deliberately two-dimensional sketch rather than the full picture. That's why I came early, I said. So you could get to know the real me before facing everyone tomorrow. I'm still Isabella. I still love art and hate olives and sleep with 2 pillows. I'm just also the founder and CEO of Visual Sphere. Which does what? Exactly? Michael asked, and I realized with a pang that they didn't even know the basics of my professional life. I spent the next hour explaining my company, our technology, and the journey from startup to industry leader. They listened with varying degrees of comprehension and interest. My father asked surprisingly technical questions about our business model. Olivia wanted to know about our medical applications. Michael seemed most interested in our stock performance and investment rounds. As the initial shock wore off, the atmosphere shifted subtly. The anger and hurt remained, but curiosity began to emerge as well. They were finally seeing a dimension of me they'd never bothered to look for before. When the housekeeper announced dinner was ready, we moved to the dining room in a state of uneasy truce. The meal was elegant but tense, with conversation that carefully avoided both the years of deception and the Forbes revelation. Instead, my mother steered us towards safe topics, the renovations to their summer home, Michael's son's college applications, Olivia's recent medical conference. It was almost normal, except for the weight of unspoken questions hanging over us. It wasn't until dessert that my father finally addressed the elephant in the room again. Tomorrow, the entire family will be here, he said pragmatically. We need to decide how we're handling this situation. My mother nodded quickly. Yes, what should we tell everyone? Perhaps we could say we've known all along but kept it private for security reasons. I put down my fork. I'm not lying anymore. Not even to save face. If anyone asks, I'll tell them the truth, that I built my company independently and chose not to discuss it with family. That will make us look terrible, my mother protested. Like we weren't supportive or interested in your life. The irony of her concern for appearances rather than the reality behind them was not lost on me. Were you? I asked simply. No one answered. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear, the perfect weather for the annual Reed family reunion picnic. As I dressed in my hotel room, I steeled myself for the day ahead. The conversation with my immediate family had been difficult enough. Now I would face aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends who had witnessed my journey from creative but impractical child to supposed struggling artist. I chose my outfit carefully, designer jeans and a silk blouse that were elegant without being ostentatious, paired with simple gold jewelry. I wanted to look like myself, not the caricature of a billionaire or the downplayed version I'd previously presented. When I arrived at my parents' estate, caterers were already setting up on the expansive back lawn. Rented tables dotted the space, covered in white linens and floral centerpieces. A small stage had been erected for the traditional family speeches and announcements. My mother intercepted me as soon as I stepped onto the patio. Isabella, we need to talk before everyone arrives, she said urgently, pulling me into the kitchen where my father, Michael, and Olivia were already waiting. We've discussed it, my father announced without preamble, and we think it's best if we present a united front about your situation. What does that mean exactly? I asked, already wary of their collective decision. We'll say we've always known about your success, but respected your wish for privacy, my mother explained. That way, no one needs to know about the misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding, I corrected. It was a deliberate choice on my part, based on years of feeling like my path wasn't valued. Do we really need to get into all that? Michael asked impatiently. This is supposed to be a celebration, not a family therapy session. I looked at each of them, realizing they were more concerned with appearances than reconciliation. I won't lie, I said firmly. If someone asks me directly, I'll tell them the truth. I'm done with pretending. Before anyone could argue further, the doorbell rang. The first guests had arrived, and our time for private discussion was over. My mother gave me a look that clearly communicated her disappointment before plastering on her hostess' smile and going to greet the newcomers. Within an hour, the backyard was filled with extended family members and longtime friends of my parents. I circulated awkwardly, accepting hugs and making small talk, aware of the curious glances and whispered conversations that followed me. My Aunt Patricia, my father's sister and always the most direct member of the family, was the first to broach the subject. Isabella, she said, cornering me by the drink table, Richard tells me you've been keeping secrets. Her tone was teasing, but her eyes were sharp with interest. Not secrets exactly, I replied. Just private about my work. Private? She laughed. Darling, you're on the Forbes list. That's a bit beyond private. We all thought you were designing websites or something in a little apartment. I smiled politely. I do design digital interfaces, among other things. It just turned out to be more successful than anyone expected. Than anyone expected, she repeated, raising an eyebrow. Including your parents? I hesitated, seeing my mother watching anxiously from across the lawn. I think my success took everyone by surprise, I said diplomatically. Aunt Patricia wasn't satisfied. But surely they knew you were running a major company? Richard always has his finger on the pulse of the business world. Before I could respond, my cousin Ethan joined us. Izzy, the secret billionaire, he exclaimed loudly enough for nearby guests to turn. Mom says you've been pretending to be broke all these years. What's that about? I winced at his volume and phrasing. I never said I was broke, Ethan. I just didn't advertise my financial situation. But why? He pressed. If I were a billionaire, I'd make sure everyone knew it. That's exactly why you're not one, Aunt Patricia told her son dryly, before turning back to me. But he does have a point, Isabella. It's unusual to hide such success, especially from family. I was saved from answering by my niece Sophie, who rushed up with her phone. Aunt Izzy, is this really your house? She showed me an Instagram post from an architectural magazine featuring my California home. Yes, that's where I live, I confirmed, seeing more family members gravitating toward our conversation. But it's amazing, Sophie exclaimed. Mom said you lived in some tiny apartment with roommates. I glanced at Olivia, who had the grace to look embarrassed. That's what we thought, she said defensively. The circle around me grew as more relatives joined, each with their own questions and comments. The story of my secret billions had clearly been circulating before I'd even arrived. My cousin Jennifer's husband, a finance guy who'd always been condescending about my career, suddenly wanted to discuss investment strategies. An uncle who had never shown interest in my life before asked for a job for his son. A distant cousin wondered if I could fund her startup idea. The attention was overwhelming and largely superficial. Few asked about the actual work I did or the journey to build my company. They wanted to know about my car, my house, my net worth, the trappings rather than the substance. As lunch was served, I found myself seated at a table with my immediate family and my father's brother, Uncle Robert, a retired judge known for his blunt opinions. While others were still dancing around the subject, Uncle Robert addressed it head-on. So, Richard, he said to my father, how did you miss that your daughter was building $1 billion company right under your nose? Seems like the kind of thing you'd notice. My father's jaw tightened. Isabella was very private about her business ventures. Private. Uncle Robert scoffed. Or did you just not pay attention because you assumed she couldn't succeed in her chosen field? The table fell uncomfortably silent. My mother looked mortified, Olivia studied her plate, and Michael seemed torn between defending our parents and acknowledging the truth. That's not fair, my mother finally said. We've always supported all our children. Uncle Robert turned to me. Is that how you remember it, Isabella? All eyes shifted to me. This was the moment to either maintain the peace with a polite fiction or speak my truth. I took a deep breath. No, I said quietly. That's not how I remember it. My mother gasped softly. My father's expression hardened. I remember being told repeatedly that my interests weren't valuable. I continued. That art and design weren't real careers. That I was wasting my potential. After a while, it seemed easier to let you believe what you wanted about my life than to constantly defend my choices. We were concerned, my father said stiffly. Parents worry. You weren't concerned about Michael's or Olivia's careers, I pointed out. You celebrated their every achievement while questioning mine. Because they chose sensible paths, my mother exclaimed. And I didn't. I finished for her. Even now, knowing the outcome, you still think my path wasn't sensible. Uncle Robert watched this exchange with interest. Seems to me, he said thoughtfully, that the real issue isn't that Isabella kept secrets. It's why she felt she needed to. His comment hung in the air, uncomfortably accurate. The conversation might have continued in this revealing direction if not for the clinking of glass that signaled the start of the traditional family speeches. As we moved toward the small stage, my father pulled me aside. We'll finish this discussion later, he said tersely. Let's not make a scene. I nodded, though I knew there was no going back now. The truth was finally emerging, messy and uncomfortable as it might be. The family speeches began as they always did, with my father welcoming everyone and offering a toast to the Reed family legacy. Michael followed with updates about his children and recent professional achievements. Olivia spoke about her medical research and upcoming sabbatical. Each presentation was polished and predictable, highlighting successes while glossing over challenges. Then, unexpectedly, my father called my name. And now, I believe Isabella has some news to share with the family. I froze. We hadn't discussed me speaking, and I wasn't prepared. All eyes turned to me expectantly as I slowly made my way to the small podium. Standing before my extended family, I saw a sea of curious faces. Some genuinely interested, others calculating, a few barely concealing their envy or resentment. The weight of 15 years of partial truths and careful omissions pressed down on me. Thank you, Dad. I began awkwardly. I'm not sure what news you're expecting me to share, but I suppose the elephant in the room is the recent Forbes article that some of you may have seen. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. My mother looked nervous, my father impassive. For those who haven't seen it, I was recently included on their billionaires list. I continued, feeling surreal saying these words to people who had only ever known me as the family's creative, but impractical middle child. This came as a surprise to my immediate family, who weren't aware of the full extent of my company's success. I paused, deciding how honest to be in this public setting. My mother's pleading eyes asked for discretion, but something in me had broken open. After years of diminishing myself in these gatherings, I couldn't do it anymore. The truth is, I've spent 15 years allowing you all to believe I was struggling financially when I wasn't. That was my choice, and I take responsibility for it. But it wasn't a choice made in a vacuum. I looked directly at my parents. When I was growing up in this family, success had a very narrow definition. It meant Ivy League degrees, traditional professions, and conventional achievements. My interest in art and technology didn't fit that definition, so it wasn't valued. My father shifted uncomfortably. Some of the older relatives looked shocked at this public airing of family dynamics. When I moved to California after college, it was to co-found what would become Visual Sphere, a company that uses visual recognition technology to transform how computers understand images. Today, our software helps diagnose diseases, powers autonomous vehicles, and is used by space agencies around the world. For the first time, I saw genuine interest and surprise on many faces. Not about the money, but about the work itself. I never discussed this with family because, frankly, I got tired of defending my choices. It was easier to let you believe I was still the impractical dreamer than to constantly explain a business, most of you wouldn't understand or value. I saw my Aunt Patricia nodding slightly, as if pieces were falling into place for her. So yes, I am successful by conventional metrics now. But I've been successful on my own terms for years, building something meaningful, working with brilliant people, solving complex problems. The billion-dollar valuation is just a number. The work itself has always been the reward. I was about to step away when my cousin Ethan called out, "So, are you going to buy a yacht now, or what?" Several people laughed, breaking the tension. I smiled.
No yachts.
I prefer to invest in education and research. As I moved to return to my seat, my father stepped back to the microphone. "Isabella has certainly surprised us all," he said, his voice strained but controlled. "The Reed family has always valued achievement, and while we may not have fully appreciated Isabella's path, we are certainly proud of her success." It was a diplomatic statement, neither fully acknowledging his role in our estrangement nor completely embracing my choices. Typical of my father, maintaining appearances above all. As the formal program concluded and guests dispersed to mingle, I found myself surrounded by relatives with newfound interest in my life. Some were genuinely curious about my company, others transparently interested in potential investments or jobs. I answered questions politely, but felt increasingly drained by the sudden attention from people who had previously dismissed me. I was reaching my limit when my father approached, gesturing toward his study. "A word, Isabella." I followed him into the familiar room lined with leather-bound books and investment awards. It had always been his sanctuary, a place where he made important decisions and had serious conversations. As a child, being summoned here usually meant trouble. He closed the door and sat behind his massive desk, a position of authority he'd always favored for difficult discussions. I remained standing. "That was quite a speech," he said finally. "It was the truth." "Your version of it," he countered. "You made it sound like we didn't support you." "Did you?" I asked simply. He frowned. "We paid for your education. We never cut you off. Financial support isn't the only kind of support, Dad. When was the last time you asked about my work with genuine interest? Not about the money or the stock price, but the actual work." He had no immediate answer. When Visual Sphere secured our first major contract, I called Mom to share the news. "Do you know what she said?" "That's nice, dear, but when are you going to get a stable job with benefits?" After that, I stopped sharing. My father looked genuinely surprised. "I didn't know that. There's a lot you don't know," I said quietly. "Like how I worked 3 jobs to fund our startup because I refused to ask you for money I knew would come with strings attached. Or how I slept on an office floor for 6 months during our first development crunch. Or how I've donated more to Dad's alma mater than he has, anonymously, because education changed my life too." My father's expression shifted from defensive to something more complex. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm tired," I admitted. Tired of being 2 different people. Tired of downplaying my accomplishments with the people who should have been celebrating them all along. Tired of pretending to be less so others can feel more. He was silent for a long moment, studying me as if seeing me clearly for the first time. "I always thought you were unfocused," he finally said. "Jumping from art to computers to business ideas. I didn't see the connection between your interests that you obviously did." It wasn't quite an apology, but from my father, it was a significant admission. "I never wanted to disappoint you," I said, voicing a fear that had driven me for decades. "But I also couldn't be the person you wanted me to be." "And now you're more successful than any of us," he said with a hint of irony. "By your metrics, maybe. But that was never my goal." Before he could respond, the door opened and my mother entered, followed by Michael and Olivia. Apparently, this had evolved into a full family intervention. "What's going on?" my mother asked, looking between us anxiously. "Isabella and I are having a long overdue conversation," my father said. "About humiliating us in front of the entire family?" Michael asked sharply. "I didn't humiliate anyone," I defended. "I told my truth." "Your truth makes us look terrible," he shot back. "Like we didn't support your dreams or believe in you." "Did you?" I challenged. Michael faltered. Olivia stepped forward. I did, she said quietly. At least I thought I did. But looking back, I can see how we all fed into this family narrative about you being the dreamer who needed guidance. I never questioned it. Her honesty was unexpected and touching. Thank you for acknowledging that, I said. My mother sat down heavily. I don't understand why you felt you needed to deceive us for so long. Were we really so awful that you couldn't share your success? It wasn't that you were awful, I tried to explain. It was that you had such fixed ideas about me and my capabilities that it became exhausting to constantly challenge them. And after a while, there was a certain freedom in being underestimated. Freedom? My father questioned. Yes. When no one expects anything from you, you're free to define success on your own terms. No one was watching over my shoulder or second-guessing my decisions. I could fail or succeed based solely on my own choices. But we're your family, my mother protested. We should have been part of your journey. You could have been, I said gently, if you'd shown interest in understanding my work rather than trying to change my direction. The room fell silent as my words sank in. Outside, we could hear the sounds of the reunion continuing, laughter, conversations, children playing. Life going on while our family reckoning unfolded in the study. So where do we go from here? My father finally asked, ever the pragmatist. It was the question I'd been asking myself since the Forbes article had forced this confrontation. What did I want from this family now? Validation? Connection? Understanding? I think we start over, I said. Get to know each other as we actually are, not as we've assumed each other to be. No more pretending. No more expectations. Just honesty. My father nodded slowly. It wasn't enthusiasm, but it was acceptance, perhaps the most I could hope for after 15 years of mutual misunderstanding. The remainder of the family reunion passed in a blur of conversations and recalibrated relationships. Some relatives were genuinely interested in getting to know the real me, while others were clearly more focused on what my wealth might mean for them. I navigated these interactions as authentically as possible, no longer downplaying my achievements or pretending to be someone I wasn't. By Sunday evening, as the last guest departed, I found myself sitting on the back patio with my immediate family. The tension hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something more thoughtful, more curious. I still can't believe you own a house designed by Hamilton Gray, my mother said, referring to the architectural feature of my California home that had fascinated her most. I've admired his work for years. You should come visit, I offered, surprising myself. See it in person. Her eyes widened slightly. You'd want us to visit? If you're interested in seeing my actual life, yes, I said honestly. Not to judge or critique, but to understand. My father cleared his throat. I've been reading about visual spheres since yesterday. Your medical imaging technology is impressive. Coming from him, this was high praise. We're particularly proud of that division, I acknowledged. It's saving lives. The market valuation is extraordinary for a company your age, he continued, still more comfortable discussing business metrics than personal feelings. Dad, Olivia interrupted gently, I think we're trying to move beyond just the financial aspects. He looked momentarily flustered, then nodded. Yes, of course. I simply meant that Isabella has clearly built something substantial. Not just valuable, but meaningful. It was perhaps the closest he would come to admitting he had misjudged my path, and I accepted it as such. I have a question, Michael said, leaning forward. All these years when we thought you couldn't afford to chip in for Mom and Dad's anniversary gifts or family vacations, were you just letting us cover your share? I shook my head. I made anonymous donations to the charities they supported instead, usually 10 times whatever amount you all collected. And I never went on the family vacations because I genuinely couldn't take the time away from the company during those growth phases, not because of money. So, all the times you sent modest Christmas gifts, my mother began. I was trying not to call attention to myself, I explained. But I've been funding college accounts for all the nieces and nephews since they were born. Olivia gasped. That was you? We got letters saying a family trust had been established, but we could never figure out which relative was behind it. I nodded. I wanted to contribute meaningfully without having to explain my financial situation. But why maintain the struggling artist facade for so long? Michael pressed. Even after you became successful? I considered the question carefully. At first, it was self-protection. I didn't want to hear that I'd just been lucky or that my success wasn't really due to my abilities. Then, as time passed, the disparity between what you believed and the reality became so great that revealing the truth seemed impossible without making everyone feel foolish or betrayed. Like ripping off a Band-Aid that had been on too long, Olivia suggested.
Exactly.
And the longer I waited, the harder it became. My father, who had been listening thoughtfully, finally asked the question that had clearly been bothering him most. Were we really so dismissive of your interests that you felt you couldn't share your successes with us? The directness of his question deserved an equally direct answer. Yes, I said simply. You were. Not out of malice, but out of a genuine belief that your way was the only path to success. He absorbed this with a pained expression. I thought I was protecting you from disappointment. I know, I acknowledged. But in trying to shield me from potential failure, you missed the chance to support my actual success. As the evening progressed, our conversation deepened. For perhaps the first time, we spoke to each other as adults with equal standing, not as the successful patriarch and his children, not as the golden siblings and the creative disappointment, but as four individuals with different paths, different strengths, and different perspectives. 3 months later, my parents visited my California home for the first time. My mother marveled at the architecture she had only seen in magazines, while my father spent hours in my home office, finally asking substantive questions about my business. They met my friends, my executive team, and saw firsthand the life I had built. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. Decades of misunderstanding couldn't be erased in a single weekend or visit. My father still occasionally slipped into offering unsolicited business advice. My mother still sometimes made comments about my personal life that revealed her traditional expectations. But there was a genuine effort to connect, to understand, to respect our differences. The most significant change came 6 months after the Forbes revelation, when my family attended Visual Sphere's annual charity gala. Watching my parents interact with my colleagues, seeing the pride on their faces as I delivered the keynote address, I realized we had turned a corner. They were finally seeing me, not the daughter they had imagined or the success story they now wanted to claim, but the actual person I had become. As for me, I learned that authenticity requires courage not just in professional settings, but in personal relationships as well. The walls I had built to protect myself had also prevented genuine connection. By compartmentalizing my life so completely, I had denied myself the possibility of being fully known and accepted by the people who, despite our differences, had shaped me. The journey of reconciliation continues. We are learning, sometimes awkwardly, how to build relationships based on who we actually are rather than who we once thought each other to be. It isn't always easy, but it is always real. And after 15 years of partial truths, reality is what we all need most. So, what would I tell someone else in a similar situation? Don't wait for a Forbes article to force your hand. The longer you live a compartmentalized life, the harder it becomes to integrate those separate selves. Success isn't just about what you achieve professionally, but about being able to share that journey authentically with the people who matter to you, even when that requires difficult conversations and uncomfortable truths. Have you ever hidden a significant achievement from your family or friends? What would it take for you to share your full, authentic self with the people in your life? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more stories about navigating success, family dynamics, and personal growth. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, your success is yours to define, but it's always sweeter when shared with people who truly see you.